Welcome to UK Election Analysis. This is the channel where we're going to be talking about UK elections, political parties, and how recent events might affect UK elections. Think fun with flags, but for UK elections. Today we're going to be talking about the Liberal Democrats, the third party, thought of as the third party, not literally the third party of the United Kingdom. They got replaced by SNP in the 2015 election, and that's really important. The third party in Parliament has two questions at the Prime Minister's questions, and they get other special privileges. So it's really significant they lost that position. They've lost the position also of third vote-wise to the UKIP party, and they lost a lot of integrity after the coalition. They went back on promises they made, and they lost votes and seats really left, right and centre. On the left to Labour, they lost seats in urban areas, metropolitan areas, seats like Norwich South, Cambridge, Bermondsey and Old Southwark, and they lost seats on the right, swathes and swathes of seats in the southwest, some in mid Wales. They also lost seats in Scotland. They lost loads of seats, and they lost a lot of, integrity and a lot of what they were thought of in political persuasion. So I've come up with a new map where I think that they could realistically get in the next election. This is about a landslide scenario for the Liberal Democrats, but not a literal landslide like we might think for Labour or the Conservatives. This is a landslide for the Liberal Democrats where they could get back to 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 seats they got prior to the 2015 election, where they got 8 seats. That's the worst since 1970. Also, I want to say about 2015, this was the election for third parties. UKIP gained 9.5% seats. SNP won Scotland. Green gained votes, although they didn't gain any seats. In fact, Labour and Conservatives gained votes. The only people that lost votes, major party-wise, was the Liberal Democrats. 15.2% of their votes. That's almost twice as bad as Labour did in 2019, to put that in context, and they're a smaller party. So this is about 60 seats that I think the Liberal Democrats could realistically take in the next election. I've not done Scotland purely because Scotland moves its own way. It doesn't move like England and Wales does. The Conservatives are a lot less popular than the SNP are in Scotland, so there's more opportunity for the Liberal Democrats in England. I think it's unlikely that the Liberal Democrats could really make any real gains in Scotland. Maybe 1 or 2 at best case, but I think it's looking like they'll probably lose seats, perhaps lose 3 of their 4 seats in Scotland, like they did in the 2015 election. So categories, I've got traditional seats that the Liberal Democrats had prior to 2015. They're heartland seats they really relied on. Seats in rural areas, less affluent, outside of the Westminster bubble really. And they had that local feel about them, the Liberal Democrats, which I think they really lost in the coalition. They felt more like they had more integrity, like they were out of the dogfight between the Conservatives and Labour, but they lost that in the 2015 election because they were in that coalition. And I've also come up with those more Remain traditional home county seats they targeted in the last election. They made headway, but they only really gained St Albans. This is quite fertile territory for the Conservatives. Seats where for the Liberal Democrats, Conservatives have really lost support in these seats. And I think, they could definitely go to Liberal Democrats. A seat we're going to look at for that traditional seats is North Devon. North Devon was quite a reliable Liberal Democrat seat prior to 2015 from 1992. But they lost there, and they've been losing by quite a fair margin. In 2019, they lost by 26.7%. Well, the Conservatives had that 14,830 majority in that seat, and that was down even further from 2017, probably because a lot of these seats voted for Brexit, and the Remain hardline Remain stance of the Liberal Democrats wouldn't have gone down well in those seats. North Devon voted for Brexit by 57%, so you can imagine that wasn't very popular in that sort of seat. But in the North Shropshire by-election, we saw that Leave voters were flocking to the Liberal Democrats. They managed to really bring in a coalition of former Conservative voters, a lot of the less affluent Leave voters in that constituency, and they won them on bread and butter issues like the cost of living crisis, less trust in the Conservative Party and the Conservative government. This was the seat of Owen Paterson, who was mired in corruption scandals, and Boris Johnson was really dragged down by that. And this was unforeseen. They overturned a 23,000 Conservative majority, replaced it with an 8,000 Liberal Democrat majority. 6,000 Liberal Democrat majority, which for a by-election with low turnout is quite outstanding, actually. And this was a constituency even more leafy than Devon North. And if they can win a constituency like this, which I wasn't really even thought of being a marginal constituency, they can definitely win seats like Devon North, Cornwall North, Somerton and Frome, other seats in those rural, leafy, less affluent areas. But on the other side of the coin is that Romani home counties, more affluent seats, a seat like Guildford. Guildford went to the Liberal Democrats in 2001, but it's never really been considered a marginal constituency really until the last election, where the Liberal Democrats had high hopes for taking that seat. And I think they were really held back in a lot of these home county seats. The only one they gained was St Albans. They were held back, I believe. Well, one of my theories is because of Jeremy Corbyn, because of the transformative, whatever you want to call it, ideas of the Labour Party, particularly on taxing high earners. And now that might have gone down better in less affluent areas, but in more affluent areas, like the home counties, that wouldn't go down well. These are areas like Guildford. Average constituency home is 571,000. Now, I know the Liberal Democrats weren't led by Jeremy Corbyn, obviously, but I think because they were so frightened of that, they wanted to do anything they could to stop that, and they voted for Boris Johnson reluctantly. These are areas that aren't Boris Johnson's biggest fan. They didn't like Boris Johnson. They didn't like Leave. They supported Remain. They liked David Cameron. He supported Leave. He was socially liberal, quite fiscally conservative. That's just where they want their politicians. But they did not like Boris Johnson, and he didn't really try to appeal them. He really thought he had them in the bank. And I think one of the reasons which the Lib Dem should be hopeful for winning these sorts of constituencies is because they won Chesham Amersham, and that was even more conservative than Guildford, by a fairer margin. An older seat, less Leave, more affluent than Guildford and many of these other home county seats, and they won it. They overturned a 16,000 majority and replaced it with an 8,000 majority, which is amazing for a by-election. And they really did this because Sarah Green managed to almost mould herself into that ideal candidate for this constituency. There was talk that perhaps even before the Conservative MP who was there died, they were putting in the groundworks to win this seat because it was so important for them. And they won it, and that was really significant for them. They won it by a fair margin, a 25.2% swing. And if they can win a seat like that, you know, they can win other seats, definitely. And this was really significant. They squeezed the Labour vote to win that seat completely. Worst Labour result in ages, 1.6%. That's ridiculous, but obviously that's because it was squeezed. That's not really much to say about Labour. See here, Ed Davey doing some crappy publicity stunt, but I suppose if it works for them. And this really gave the Liberal Democrats hope that they could win blue wall constituencies in the south, heartland Conservative seats that they didn't really think were marginal. And in the next few elections, they've really got to be worried about that. Can they balance those gains in the north in leafy areas with those heartland Conservative seats, and if they get it wrong, they could be left with neither. One of the reasons I think they could win both these sets of seats is just because there's less goodwill going around for the Conservative Party than there was in 2019. Boris Johnson has been absolutely tarnished by scandals like the Owen Paterson affair, and I think he's finding it harder to bounce back. Labour has been ahead in the polls for the last few months by considerable margins. It's narrowing up now, but I don't think he'll ever get back to the leads he had before. There are some other constituencies that the Liberal Democrats could look to take. I put metropolitan constituencies in the 2010 election. The Liberal Democrats in the 2005 and 2010 elections, the Liberal Democrats picked up a lot of metropolitan seats from Labour. Labour lost support on Iraq, and the Liberal Democrats were less gung-ho when it came to Iraq than the Labour Party were. So they lost support in those seats: Bermondsey and Old Southwark, Sheffield Hallam. They didn't lose that in 2015, but they lost it in 2017, Sheffield Hallam, Nick Clegg's seat. And in a made-up landslide for the Liberal Democrats, they would probably win a few of these seats back. Sheffield Hallam wasn't held by a huge margin, 712 Labour majority in that seat, so not anything significant. Cambridge a bit more, 18% Labour majority, but they could win some of these seats back. I think it's unlikely. I think they're going to get most of those seats from those two categories that I've just talked about, both from the Conservatives. I can't really see the Liberal Democrats gaining Labour seats, not that they would particularly want to. They're positioning themselves as an anti-Conservative party. They are far. If there was an election where there was a hung parliament, you can see it's a lot more easy to think about the idea of a Labour Liberal Democrat coalition than a Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition like we had before. I mean, in my lifetime, well, not in my lifetime, but in my time observing politics, I'm not that old, but I can't really. Since the 2015 election, I can't think of the Liberal Democrats and Conservatives being friends, really, being together in Parliament. And the other ones I've put in are just those classic marginal constituencies that the Liberal Democrats were strong in. Seats like Cheltenham. This was a seat that I would have put in with the Remain home county seats, but I think because the Liberal Democrats did actually hold it by quite strong, I just put it as classic marginal. They could, obviously, as the Liberal Democrats come off life support, gain support, they could definitely win a seat like this back. They only lost it by 981 votes in the last election. There's other constituencies like it that I think could work together. I'm not sure how realistic this is. I definitely think the Liberal Democrats will make gains, quite significant gains in the next election. They could double their seats, get to about 22 to 30 seats perhaps. Probably not this extent, but I think they position themselves quite strongly as the party that can take seats that Labour, the Green Party, SNP, Plaid can't take from the Conservatives, and that those parties might be willing to almost overtly or not, or behind, tacitly collude with the Liberal Democrats over seats like this in sort of non-aggression or lower aggression pacts in these seats that they can't win. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. It is my first one, so forgive me if I made any errors or anything. It's also the fourth time I've recorded this video because I kept forgetting to put my sound on. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I want to bring out more videos like this. I want to bring out one about the Greens, one about how class realignment might reoccur in British politics. So I hope you're excited about those videos, and I hope you'd consider subscribing so you can see some more videos like this, and also giving it a thumbs up or a comment or even a dislike, because I want to know your opinion if you liked or disliked this video, and I hope to see you next video.